For those of you who don't know, the Illawarra Health and Medical Research Institute, which is better known as IHMRI, IHMRI, is a not-for-profit charity, and we support health and medical researchers in the Illawarra Shoalhaven region. Our goal is to bring scientists, researchers, and the medical profession together to help solve our greatest challenges through research. We do research into a wide variety of diseases and illnesses such as cancer, diabetes, mental illness, and dementia, just to name a few. So over to today's webinar. Around 0.85% of Australia's population is thought to be living with Parkinson's, and currently there's no cure. A diagnosis can occur at any age, with the most common age of diagnosis being about 65. There's no known cause for the development of Parkinson's, but we'll talk about the various risk factors that could play a role during the course of the webinar. And of course, to answer any of your questions, we have a panel of experts. So to start off, we have Professor Heath Ecroyd. Heath is a Senior Fellow here at IHMRI and the UAW, and heads up a laboratory research in the biochemistry and cellular biology of neurodegenerative disease, with a major focus on understanding the cause of Parkinson's and how to prevent it from happening, and of course to find a treatment. We have Parkinson's New South Wales CEO, Joanne Reeves. Joanne is strongly focused on advocating and seeking funding for the placement of more community-based Parkinson's neurological nurses in our community as just one element of her role. Excuse me. We have IHMRI's Dr. Claire Stevens. Claire completed her PhD in Parkinson's research here at IHMRI, and has come on board today to share her experience caring for her dad, who has been living with Parkinson's for the last 20 years. And we also have Parkinson's nurse specialist, Nina Digiglio. Nina is the Parkinson's specialist nurse for Parkinson's New South Wales, focusing in the Shoalhaven region, and supports over 1,700 people and their families living with Parkinson's. So thank you to all of our panelists today. We really appreciate you taking time out to join us. And I thought to kick us off, Claire, we might go over to you. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your story with Parkinson's and a little bit about your family.
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about my family's journey with Parkinson's. So my dad has 5 daughters. I have an elder sister and I have 3 younger sisters. And I guess the thing that I really love about my family is that we really like each other. We really like spending time together. When something goes wrong, we all band together and support each other. And I think, you know, that's been no different to supporting my dad throughout his journey with Parkinson's. So growing up, my dad was our major breadwinner. My mum stayed at home with myself and my younger sisters and looked after us. And, you know, Dad was very committed to his work and very committed to his family. And he would often have, you know, at least a couple of international trips overseas. So it kept him very busy. But we always made time to have, you know, special family holidays together. You know, growing up, I have wonderful memories of spending time at the beach, by the ocean. My dad was a big scuba diver. So we'd have lots of camping holidays where we'd pack up our boat with all of his scuba diving gear, the camping stuff, and traipse down the south coast, meet up with his dive buddies, and have some really wonderful time together. So as we got older, myself and one of my other sisters, we started to learn to scuba dive, and we would do that with my dad. And we have, excuse me, wonderful memories of just sitting on the boat after a dive, having a cup of tea, always pizza shapes. always had some pizza shapes, and then meeting up with my mum and my younger sisters by the beach and having lunch together. So, you know, we had a really wonderful time growing up. But, you know, as things happen, you know, around the time that I was in my early years of high school, my dad started to notice that he had a bit of a tremor in his pinky that didn't go away. You know, it's one of those things where you think it's going to go away, then you hope it's going to go away, then you realize that there's something wrong. And that's when he went to see his GP, and who sent us off to a neurologist. And he came back with, you know, it was likely to be Parkinson's. And, you know, this was a really difficult time the next few years. You know, Dad's symptoms started to increase. He started to, you know, get tremor in his arm, tremor starting to affect the other side of his body. He found it really difficult to keep weight on, and eventually started to have falls. So, you know, that was really confronting for him. You know, initially he would try and hide his symptoms. He didn't really want to tell people about it. But over time, you know, this becomes impossible. People realize there's something going on, and you do have to, you know, come to terms with it yourself, as well as, you know, get the courage up to tell other people what's happening with you. So I guess probably about 10 years into his journey with Parkinson's, I was in my early years of a Bachelor of Medical Science. And that's when things really started to change at home. You know, Dad was having falls. He got to the point where he realized that life as we knew it really couldn't continue. Traveling overseas, sitting on an aeroplane was all just, it was really hard for him. So at that point, you know, Dad decided that, you know, he wouldn't be able to continue work, or he just wasn't able to. And my mum retrained, and she went back to work full time. So there was a full role reversal. Dad was doing, you know, a lot of the housework, a lot of the cooking, and mum was bringing in the money. So, you know, that was something that took a lot of courage on both of my parents' part, and something that my sisters and I are really proud of them, you know, for having the courage to do that. So, yeah, I guess next sort of thing is, why did I choose to, you know, do my PhD in Parkinson's? So, you know, at that point, I was coming to the end of my bachelor degree, and I thought, you know, a PhD might be something that I would be interested in doing. And so, you know, it really made sense to me that if I was going to spend my life, you know, doing something, then I wanted to make it meaningful. And for me, that was, you know, being able to support my dad by doing research in Parkinson's, and being able to potentially, you know, help all the other people living with Parkinson's as well.
And Claire, did you find that doing your PhD in Parkinson's did help your dad in terms of accessing other care or treatment through the networks that you created?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really unexpected but very happy result of having done my PhD, and was that I was able to really explain to my mum and dad what was happening with my dad, explain to him why he had all these different medications and what each one was doing. And but not only that, but I met a whole, you know, new network of people, and we were really able to find the right team of people to look after Dad. You know, find for him the right neurologist that could explain things in the way that made sense to him, and could put him on a path that would eventually allow him to have deep brain stimulation, which was one of the very best things that we have done in terms of his treatment. You know, that gave him a whole new quality of life that we just wouldn't have experienced without it. And I think that's, you know, those are sort of two of the reasons that I really was excited to get involved in the webinar today, because obviously not everybody has someone in the family who is doing a PhD in Parkinson's, but I really wanted to be able to emphasize the point that, you know, these wonderful resources that, you know, Parkinson's New South Wales can provide for people. You know, they can direct you to people, you know, that will help you find that right team, help you get that right, you know, combination of neurologists or, you know, someone to help you with exercise, you know, whatever it is that you need, but you just need to be aware of those resources. And that's, you know, why this webinar today is so fabulous. So talking to my dad about this webinar, one of the things that he really wanted to, you know, make sure people were aware, and I think, you know, Parkinson's New South Wales will probably talk a bit about this as well, but was the importance of exercise. And this was another, again, unexpected, but really happy thing that came out of my PhD. And that was, I was presenting some work in Ireland overseas, and I heard about some amazing research that they were doing, where they'd actually found that people with typical Parkinson's could still ride a bike. So even if they couldn't walk or barely could walk, like my dad, they could actually still ride a bike. And so I got so excited, came back from this conference, went out, found my dad a bike that, you know, he could, had a bit of a wider seat, so that, you know, any balance issues could still kind of, you know, could support him. And he was actually able to just get on the bike and ride down the road. And, you know, this is somebody who was having so much difficulty sort of even walking around the house. That was just an amazing feeling for him. And even to this day, he still rides his bike every day. And it just gives him that sort of sense of freedom and sense of being in control of, you know, one aspect of your life. So yeah, that's a bit about our story.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing your story, and thank you to your family as well for their generosity in allowing you to share that story with us. And fantastic news about the bicycle. And if you'd not gone to that conference, then perhaps your dad wouldn't have known that. But also your message to people to speak to Parkinson's New South Wales, to find out what services and support there is out there, and different ideas for increasing their physical activity, for example. That's great. Thank you so much, Claire.
You're very welcome.
Nina, does that story sound familiar to you? I know you're out in the community a lot. For example, potentially people hiding symptoms because they don't want to let those closest to them know that they're struggling, or people not really understanding the symptoms or the condition when they're told that, you know, you have Parkinson's.
Yeah, look, everyone's story is completely different, but that is a very common story. Not everyone has the tremors first up. Sometimes there's other symptoms. It's a very complex disease because in Parkinson's, it affects part of the brain called the autonomic nervous system, where you get symptoms that can be quite silent, and it's unseen on the outside, but the person with Parkinson's experiences those symptoms. So that's things like loss of smell and taste, trouble sleeping, constipation and urinary problems. And then you have the motor symptoms of Parkinson's, which are a little bit more obvious on the outside, like the tremors, the slowness, the gait and balance issues. And the other one, and tremor can be there or not. So yes, it's common. That it doesn't discriminate with age. So there's varied ages in diagnosis of Parkinson's, and we have a substantial number of younger onset Parkinson's. And I do find, like Claire's dad, at the start, they do hold the affected hand when they're sitting down so people can't see the tremors. And there's a couple of things going on here. They're experiencing their personal change. There's some grief because they know things are altering, and maybe a loss, and a little bit of anger that, you know, that things have, you know, that life's going to change for them. So they can keep all that to themselves for quite a while before they, you know, go to a health professional or start speaking about their symptoms.
Thank you so much for that, Nina. Heath, you have been researching Parkinson's for many, many years. around how to diagnose Parkinson's and of course how to treat and prevent Parkinson's. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And again, thanks everyone for the chance to talk about, what is really a disease that affects not only the individual, but the family around them. And Claire's example of that was such an elegant way to describe that. Yeah, what drives our research is essentially getting back to, understanding what causes this condition in the first place. Often people that are diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, we know from the research that's been done that a lot of the damage that occurs in the brain is already happened. And therefore, there's many of the treatment options are just those. They're options to treat the symptoms that we see as a result of the disease. But really, after all these years of study, we still don't know at a fundamental level what causes the disease and therefore how we can intervene. And that's really where my research passion comes in. We really want to understand, what is it that causes the loss of nerve cells in the brain that ultimately lead to these motor symptoms or non-motor symptoms that we see with Parkinson's disease. And if we know that, if we know what happens at the molecular level, the hope from research such as mine is that we can then intervene in some way. Now, that actually might be that we have to intervene very early on. And that's the thing that we really think is important, is to intervene really early on so that we can either lessen those symptoms as they, so delay them as they would normally progress, or indeed even prevent them altogether would be, that's the ultimate goal of the type of research that we do. So yeah, the thing that drives me is to understand at the molecular level. So what is actually happening in the brains of people that are developing conditions like Parkinson's disease, and by knowing that, how can we intervene? How can we think about developing drugs or ways that we can prevent those processes from happening? That's the ultimate goal of what we do.
So it's even more important than Heath for people to seek help at the first indication that something might not be quite right, so that early intervention can delay the onset of more serious symptoms. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing that it gives us an opportunity to do is to be able to use that sort of data, those people that are coming through, to understand how Parkinson's disease does develop. As Nina mentioned, it can be quite varied for different people. But as a researcher, what we'd like to actually be able to do is use some sort of biomarker to be able to say, this is someone that will or is developing Parkinson's disease. That allows us to then think about, are we able to use that marker, that change? It may be in something in the blood, or it might be something else, to then track back and see whether, at what point does that change occur? And that may well be before people start to have symptoms. And for someone like myself as a researcher, that's a really important thing to understand, because that might be a window of opportunity that we have to prevent the symptoms from occurring later on.
And you mentioned about we don't really know a huge amount about what causes Parkinson's. Through your research and through the research of your peers, has anything come up that has led you to believe certain, like whether it's genetics or lifestyle or just sheer luck of why people might develop Parkinson's?
Yeah, so the particular focus of my research is if you look in the brains of people with Parkinson's disease, we see primarily two things. One is that the nerve cells in certain regions of the brain are lost. And the other hallmark that you see in people's brains is the presence of these clumps of proteins that we call Lewy bodies. They are really the defining feature of Parkinson's disease. And our research in our group believe that clumping of those proteins into these Lewy bodies is actually one of the main driving contributors towards the disease. So our focus is understanding what causes that clumping to happen in the first place, and indeed, can we prevent it from happening? And if we do so, is that a way to alleviate Parkinson's disease from occurring in the future? We know from the research that there's an element of genetic association with Parkinson's disease. There are people that have mutations in a particular protein or a particular gene called alpha-synuclein, and that leads to early onset Parkinson's disease. So that's people that are in their late 20s to even to early 30s that start to develop symptoms of Parkinson's disease. the really interesting part, again, as a researcher, is we know that that particular gene makes a protein. The protein's called alpha-synuclein, and it's that protein that's in the clumps, in these Lewy body clumps that we see. And we therefore think that it's a really key component of what drives Parkinson's disease at the molecular level. So the research that we're doing is really trying to understand, what is this protein? Why doesn't it behave itself? And what can we do to prevent that process from happening in the brains of people that are going to develop Parkinson's disease?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Heath, for giving us that summary. I'm sure there'll be questions coming in around your research that we can answer later on in the webinar. For now, Joanne, I think I might just pop over to you. I wonder, as CEO of Parkinson's New South Wales, I imagine you wear many, many hats. But I understand that you are currently looking into advocating for more specialist nurse in our community. What kind of role would nurses play in our community?
So basically, once you step out of Sydney Metro and Newcastle Metro, access to services becomes less and less and less for every kilometre you move outside of those two areas. So one of our solutions we found, and we've been partnering with Charles Sturt University on this, we've been doing a body of work on the role of the specialist Parkinson's nurse. And we find that the nurse becomes the glue in a person's continuity of care. So the nurse sits at the centre of the person's life and their family and carers, and then they become the person that coordinates all the services around them. So Claire talked about her father with exercise. I call myself the exercise Nazi, because, you know, there is research to suggest that exercise slows progression of Parkinson's, but the nurse does things like connects a person with exercise and makes sure that they continue with exercise, connects them to the physio, the OT, the speechy, because allied health in the Parkinson's space is very important. So that concept of the multidisciplinary team in caring for the person and their family is at the centre of everything that needs to happen. And the nurse that does that, the nurse is not a care partner. The nurse actually walks with the person on the journey, helps them with medication management, becomes the linchpin between the GP, the neurologist, and linking with services to make a difference to them. So our advocacy program is about getting more people connected to nurses around all of regional New South Wales. And I know you'll ask me, are there enough out there? No, there's not. There's not. There's two big areas in New South Wales where everyone's leaving Sydney and retiring to, which is Tweed Heads and Shoalhaven. We've now got a nurse in each of those regions, but we've got a big void in access to Parkinson-specific services once you leave the coastal areas of New South Wales. So, you know, all we do is talk to government and Primary Health Network around how do we get more services for people out there so that you're not, because you live in an area that hasn't got services, that it's still accessible for you.
Are you seeing any progress in an increase in nurses to those rural areas?
Yeah, we've put 2 nurses on this year. We've been really, really lucky. So the Tweed Heads nurse is a brand new nurse. That local health district, so it's called Northern New South Wales Local Health District, they put a nurse on. They co-fund it with us. So our model is co-funding. That way we can make sure that the nurse is actually deployed to do Parkinson's work, and they are linking with community. So we're lucky to get the Tweed Heads nurse operational this year. And we've just put a nurse on. She started last week in the Hornsby. We're trialling our first metro context nurse. We're advocating right at the moment for a nurse in the Goulburn region, which will take in Goulburn, Yass, Queanbeyan, and hopefully some of that South Coast region. We're also trying to get, and Nina and I went and met with the Illawarra Shoalhaven LHD about 2 weeks ago. We need more capacity in your region. That Illawarra Shoalhaven region has a large population of people with Parkinson's. We already know that from Nina's caseload, but particularly the Wollongong area needs a Parkinson's specialist nurse. You really have to drive to Sydney to see a movement disorder neurologist, and we need to change service provision. So, and I have to say thank you to IHMRI for hosting this today. This is really important considering it's World Parkinson's Day on Sunday and Parkinson's Awareness Month. So it's great to actually be able to work with a research institute with a Parkinson's focus. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Joanne and Nina, for coming on board and providing this perspective to us and to our audience. I wonder, and thank you also for advocating for all of our communities across New South Wales for more specialist nurses. It seems like you said, they're the glue that allow people and their families living with Parkinson's to really get that extra help that they might need, or the first step. What would you say, so if somebody is starting to develop symptoms of a description and they're not quite sure what's going on, you've already mentioned there's a lack of nursing specialists, but what should somebody do? Where should they go to get help?
Well, first of all, I think they've got to start with their GP. So they need to have a good relationship with their GP. And often we hear from people across the state that, you know, at the moment we're saying it's 0.85% of the population have Parkinson's. You know, that figure's increased over the last few years. Melbourne Monash University's looked at the incidence and now estimate that it's gone up from 0.3 to 0.85% of the population. Sometimes GPs don't know enough about Parkinson's, so that road to diagnosis can be a little bit too long at times. When we have a nurse in the area and the nurse works with the GP, that road to diagnosis is hopefully shortened. But you start with your GP and then hopefully they will refer you to a movement disorder neurologist. There's not enough of them, and the age cohort, a lot of them are going to retire shortly. We do have a shortage, but we need more. We need more resource across the whole Parkinson's spectrum, can I say, because I don't believe we've got enough research and enough research dollars being thrown at Parkinson's. And yes, Heath is going, yes, we definitely need more money into research. Federal government have a responsibility to do that, and that's one of the areas we need more work in advocating for. But we need more money thrown both at a state and a federal level to support people and their families. So I am going to finish the question. So as the person on their journey goes and sees a movement disorder neurologist, they then come back, they get their Parkinson's diagnosis. Hopefully, when they've seen the GP or the neurologist, they've said, hey, you've got a state body called Parkinson's New South Wales if you're sitting here in New South Wales, or there's others, there's Parkinson's Victoria, Parkinson's Queensland, etc. But you go to your local Parkinson's state body and they will work with you. So for us, we've got an inbound call line, we call it Info Line. For people sitting out at home, when you can't get to your GP, and if you don't have a nurse in your local area, call the Info Line. We've got registered nurses, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. They are fantastic at working with you and or your carer. GPs can call the line, and they will then work with you and link you to appropriate services in your local community. We also have a counsellor on staff, counsellors. We can link you with the counsellors. For those under 65, it's really important to get a link in and get an NDIS package before you turn 65. You need capacity building in your life. You need supports to make your day better every day. So that there's a long continuum of living with Parkinson's. Like Claire's father, he's been living with it for 20 years. He needs supports for him and his family so that he can live a good life every day. And you know, one of the other things about the nurse, it's to keep you healthy, and happy at home, because we don't want you to walk through the front doors of emergency. We want you to stay healthy in your local community. That was a long-winded answer.
It was a great answer, Joanne. Thank you so much. Can you just remind us of the website for Parkinson's New South Wales for people looking for that kind of support?
Yep, so www.parkinsonsnsw.org.au. And I'll give people the info line number. It is 1-800-644-189. And the resources at the end of that line are fantastic, and they will make a difference to your life.
Joanne, can you just repeat that number? I'm just popping it in the chat so that all of our audience can see it right now.
1-800-644-189.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Joanne. So Nina, you are a nurse in this area. Can you just give us a little bit of, I don't know, information about what you do and the impact that you have in your role?
Yeah, firstly, I just want to say this role, it's a real privilege because people allow you into their life and they share their deepest, darkest thoughts and secrets and, you know, issues that are occurring. And very often this disease can come between people's marriages. It's very emotive at times. So the things I do for people, so I stand at the centre holding their hand and basically lead them to varied services to support them with their needs at the time. So if someone's having difficulty with their swallow or their speech, then we refer them to a speech pathologist for some intense work. There's a program called LSVT, and trying to find the correct speech pathologist to service them at that time is vital. Sending them to a speech pathologist that doesn't understand Parkinson's can be quite problematic for someone's outcome. It's important that I find the right person that understands Parkinson's so that the person with Parkinson's gets the outcome that they're looking for. The dietitian to support with nutrition and understanding medication dosages against and protein consumption. Looking at and the GP is also at the centre with me. It's really important that I have good relationships with the GP because the GP prescribe, and for me to build relationships with the GP and the patient together allows a smooth process through the system. If the GP if the relationship is poor with the GP, then the outcomes don't tend to be as as beneficial as I would be hoping for. And then if that does occur, and other people out there with Parkinson's, you probably know what I'm talking about. If you have a GP that hasn't heard you, that we have to work around the GP a little bit, go through, the GP hasn't diagnosed it, that the specialist is definitely involved, or perhaps a geriatrician, depending on the age of the patient. So, for example, in the Shoalhaven, we don't have neurologists down here that specialise in Parkinson's. We do have geriatric specialists that have a special interest in Parkinson's. So they're my go-to people. But for those that are under 65, I need to send them up north or out of area to Canberra or to Wollongong, perhaps even Sydney, depending if they need advanced treatment, which we don't have in the Illawarra Shoalhaven area. And I know all the others listening out there, if you're from a regional town, it is very difficult to get access to the advanced therapies. So at the end of the day, I liaise, getting back to your question, I liaise with all the services pertinent for someone with Parkinson's. The exercise physiologists or physio are absolutely necessary. Put them in groups and programs, ensuring that they're accessing the Parkinson support groups, because that can be a real source of emotional support for someone. And someone living alone at home with Parkinson's, there's a deep loneliness. And with COVID, it was particularly challenging, people being at home by themselves. So a lot of people with Parkinson's quickly learnt how to use FaceTime or Zoom. And because one of the symptoms of Parkinson's is depression and anxiety, and there was a large increase in those two symptoms, which is related to Parkinson's, but it can, as a result of circumstances, these symptoms can be worse. So, ensuring that people have access to adequate counselling, psychology services, and Parkinson's support groups. Also, making sure the carers know what's going on. They are part of the solution, and ensuring that the carers are well armed with information for times when I'm not there. Sorry, Kate, I can see you want to ask a question.
That's okay. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I just wanted to ask, you mentioned about support groups. For anyone listening who is interested in finding a support group, they can find that information on your website as well.
Absolutely. Joanne, do you want to take it on from here? There are 90 support groups. I'll let you talk.
90 support groups.
Yeah, there's more than 90 support groups across the state. There's support groups just for carers, and then there are support groups for people with Parkinson's. I see we've got a couple of our support group participants on today, so a big hi to all of them. We've got some of the Illawarra people, and we've got Di from Lismore. So hi Di, nice to see that you're on and listening. Our support groups are vital. So one of the big issues with Parkinson's is depression and anxiety, and so people need that connectedness to their community, and so the support groups play a really vital role in making sure that people feel valued when they've got a Parkinson's diagnosis. So we've got some really great groups across the state, and so if people want to join them, they're better off calling us on that 1-800-644-189 number, and then we'll link you to a support group that's right for you.
Great, thank you so much, Joanne, for that information. And that number is in the chat box as well, if anybody missed it then. We've got so many questions come through. I'm going to do my absolute best to run through them. If we don't get to your question, panelists, can I just check with you? Would you be happy for me to send them on to you via email, and then we can respond to those questions to everybody in a follow-up email? Would that be okay? Great. Okay. Well, I'm just going to go to you, Heath. There's an email here from Susan. Susan has said that there was promising research from the UK a few years ago showing that a probiotic, and I may pronounce this wrong, Bacillus subtilis, that's reduced alpha, help me out, Heath. Thank you, fold in roundworms. Has this research progressed? Do you know anything about that research?
I don't know about that research in particular, but one of the conferences I went to, but while we all could still travel over into Japan, which showed some really interesting data, which was to show that some people we know, when they are, one of the first things that people are given when they're diagnosed with Parkinson's is a replacement for dopamine. L-Dopa is the standard treatment of care for many people, to replace the dopamine that's lost, because we know that those nerve cells die in the body. And what these researchers had shown was that the microbiota in your gut is actually really important on how well that L-Dopa works for a person with Parkinson's disease. So it's actually, when you take that drug, the conversion of it in your stomach into an active form that can then be used by your brain is dependent on what bacteria you have in your gut at any one time. So I think there's another question that came up about nutrition and exercise and those types of things. That all feeds into, how one aspect at least is, how well your body can react to things like supplements or treatments like L-Dopa. So whilst I'm not familiar with that particular research, I know that there is a lot of interest now in understanding what the bacteria inside the gut are actually doing, and how that might be a benefit to conditions like Parkinson's disease.
Thanks, Heath. Gosh, the gut is just so important, and nutrition and what we eat. We did a webinar in February around fruit and fibre and brain health, and I'll put a link to that in the follow-up email as well. It was so interesting at the impact that what you consume can have on your well-being in general, general day-to-day well-being. We received an email prior to the webinar from Pamela. Pamela has 3 siblings. Pamela's 82. She has 3 siblings, and each one of them has had Parkinson's. she said she occasionally is feeling some symptoms and that is in relatively good health, but she wants to know, are there any things that she can do to prevent herself from developing Parkinson's? Are there any lifestyle changes that she could make? And that's to anybody who would like to take that question on.
I can talk to the research, and it really is that we
Yeah.
don't really know. I mean, that the simple answer is that we don't know, and I think it feeds into some of the messages that we've come across today, is that really more research is required, and that research requires funding. And I think there's a place for both state and federal government to fund more research. And it's really important that people that have siblings that have developed Parkinson's disease, have the Parkinson's disease themselves, are available and know about the type of research that's being done, so that we can understand better, questions such as that. But in terms of progression, we don't really know, why some people progress more slowly than others. We do know that things like exercise are an important factor in trying to, alleviate symptoms and potentially even prevent Parkinson's disease. So there are correlations with that and diet, as there are with many other diseases. So whether it's particular to Parkinson's or just general well-being and good health. But from the research point of view, it's a really interesting question, but we just don't simply know enough.
Correct. Can I add there, to take your point, Heath, we need more people to participate in research. It's sadly, it's a worldwide phenomenon. We are not getting enough people participate in research projects. So for all of those on the panel, if you get the chance to participate, please do. The more participation, the more information and data we have. Secondly, I go around to the 90 support groups around the state, and I hear very varied responses. So for instance, I've been to the Tamworth group where they say they used to throw pesticides all over themselves, and my siblings and I have Parkinson's. The Bathurst group, there's a whole family, uncles, all down the line that have Parkinson's. We know that it's not a genetic disease, so that's not the issue. But as Heath has said, we don't know worldwide. We haven't been able to work out what the causes are. So I'm going to reiterate it again, please participate in research.
Kate.
Thank you. Sorry, everyone. There's been a question here about where do we register to participate in research. Keith, I don't think we have any current clinical trials into Parkinson's research. Is that right? Not currently?
Not here in the Illawarra that I'm aware of, but again, I would encourage people to contact Parkinson's New South Wales, because they coordinate much of that, and yeah, they're really important, and I'm so glad that Joanne and Nina are here, because they're a really important part of people's journey, and also coordination of things like for researchers, because people may not be aware, but Parkinson's New South Wales is one of the main funders of research of Parkinson's disease in New South Wales. So it's a place that people like myself look to actually be able to access, talk to people to access tissues or those types of things, and also get money and funding for those types of projects.
That was one of my questions for you, Heath, actually. How is research funded at IHMRI and more widely in New South Wales?
Yeah, I mean, we need more money. There's no doubt about that. There's lots of questions, and there's only a certain capability that we have, for example, in my laboratory to delve into certain areas. I think there's a real passion and drive from researchers to want to understand more, but at the end of the day, as we all know, it's the money that sort of allows you to ask the types of questions that you're interested in. Within Australia, we're very lucky in terms of having people like and places like Parkinson's New South Wales that we do get research funding from. Internationally, one of probably the best philanthropic donation, research coordination that we know of is the Michael J. Fox Society. They do an amazing job internationally to fund Parkinson's disease research, and there's people here within IHMRI that are being funded by them as well. And then at a state and federal level, unfortunately, there's actually not that much money. I mean, it takes a lot a lot of effort, and you know, sometimes you really have to bang your head up against the wall to try and get more money for this type of thing. So we do appreciate the money that comes through from donors and those types of things, because it really does make a difference. It makes a huge difference in what we can do.
Yeah, can I add to that? And thanks, Heath. IHMRI are a big funder in Australia, but Professor David Finkelstein from the Florey did an analysis of it a couple of years ago, and for the incidence of Parkinson's, they're not throwing enough money at it. And this is important, especially in Parkinson's Awareness Month. We really have to raise awareness of Parkinson's. People view this disease as an old person's disease. It's not. It can hit anybody at any age. And, you know, Claire's example is classic. Her father was still of working age, and he had to stop working, and mum became the primary breadwinner. So it hits families from any age, and we've really got to shout it out and say, hey, we're here. But we have the example where people want to keep it quiet. They don't want to tell people they've got Parkinson's. And so instead of people going out there, you know, and saying, hey, this is Parkinson's, they're hiding it. So we really need the awareness to be lifted, so that when researchers apply for research grant and funding, the decision makers know what Parkinson's is and go, yeah, we've got to give money to Parkinson's, because it's really important that we do find that cure. And on Michael J. Fox, so if people also want to participate, I'm aware that they're doing Michael J. Fox Foundation, and you can participate from Australia, are collecting information from people all around the world, so that they've got a big bank of participants that then researchers can get information from. We also obviously have the Brain Bank, and a lot of people have donated their brain and are on the list to donate their brain. But I think the Parkinson's Brain Bank is full at the moment. I'd have to say, Heath, do you know that? But I heard that a while ago, that brain bank is full.
I wasn't aware of that, Joanne, but that may well be true.
But yeah, so I'll check on that. But yeah, there are ways to participate here. Obviously, we don't want to talk about the brain bank after you die, but there's ways to participate now, and there's worldwide ways to participate too. So
what I might do on the follow-up email, if any of our panelists have any websites or any additional information that I can pass on to our audience, send that through to me, and I'll make sure that gets to our audience members. We've got a question here for you, Heath, about brain cells mending themselves in other conditions. Is this a phenomenon that is possible with Parkinson's?
We definitely know that there, and you know, the research in the last 10 to 15 years, that there is the possibility of. We always thought that nerve cells, once they die, that was it. But there has been research done now, and quite famous books written about the plasticity of the brain. That is, that you can regenerate nerve cells, and that of course is looking really promising in certain aspects. But generally, as you get older, that the ability to generate new cells goes down. So the ability to replace the cells that are lost, the nerve cells that are lost, is generally too slow to be able to be of benefit to many people. There are things like deep brain stimulation that Claire talked about, so there are treatment options that do look at things like trying to, regenerate areas in the brain. But in terms of replacing the nerve cells that are lost, it probably isn't going to be as viable as what you may think it to be, simply from, what research has been done in the past.
Thanks, Steve. Other questions that we've got, because we've got so many here. I'm trying to. Curious question from Kate. She says, are there any music specialists who use music to treat Parkinson's? Is anyone aware of that?
I can answer that. As sometimes doing the support groups, there are some. I've got a music therapist down in Ullawarra. She's just she's just come on board, and she just comes in and does some speech stuff and does some singing. If you are, if you do want to do some music and singing, I think going to the support groups and finding out whether they have that there would be a place to go. I wouldn't be adverse into joining a choir as well, now that we can sing again after COVID. If I just backtrack a little bit about reducing stress. We didn't really talk about how stress can impact Parkinson's. Something I've seen as a nurse, that when a person is highly stressed or anxious, the symptoms become worse. And those of you out there who do have Parkinson's probably do notice that about yourselves. So reducing stress, not only exercise, eating properly, drinking plenty of water, but reducing stress in your life, anything negative going on, seeing counsellor, psychologist, and managing that's really important.
Singing would definitely help in reducing that stress, and of course physical activity goes a long way for those people who are able to. What about those people with Parkinson's that find themselves unable to participate in physical activity? Is there anything that they can do to help alleviate symptoms and to reduce stress?
Oh, okay. So there's a lot of things. So even though you might not physically be able to do exercise anymore, there's dancing where they get people to sit in chairs, because movement and moving your torso becomes really important as you age. So there's dance classes where you sit in a chair and you do all the movement and you move your legs, because you've got to move your body so that, risk of fall, lessen risk of fall, etc. So there are ways to participate still in basic exercises as your Parkinson's progresses. And, a lot of the support groups have a dance teacher or a singing teacher come in. And that's the great thing about participating in a support group. And there's research that shows that if a person, doesn't matter the chronic illness, if you go to a support group, you're generally going to have a better outcome. So support groups become really important in people's lives, and especially where there's no nurses, because the support group will give you strategies to manage your Parkinson's better.
Can I just
add in? Oh, sorry.
No, you go, Nina.
No, you haven't spoken. You speak first.
I was just going to add on to that as well as the dancing in the chair, we've heard of some boxing classes that happen specifically tailored for Parkinson's patients, and they sit in the chair and they can do their boxing to music, and apparently it goes down a hoop. So, that's another option. And also just coming back to music in general. So for somebody like my dad, he often has very sticky feet. So he finds it difficult to get through doorways, and he often shuffles. And sometimes if we're out and about, he can just find it very difficult to even be able to put one foot in front of the other. And something that was suggested to us, and something that we have had success with, was a strong beat that he can walk to, can actually get his feet moving again. So that's something really important to think about as well.
Yes, well said, Claire. The other thing is Tai Chi. I was just at a group this morning and they did Tai Chi. They do that sitting down or standing up. But your question was about those people isolated at home. So we do have services out there that I literally connect to. So there's My Aged Care and NDIS. And part of their plan is that we get them people to clean their house, people to take them out shopping. So that does alleviate some of that isolation and loneliness. So those people out there who are watching this that aren't connected to any service provision through My Aged Care or NDIS, it's really important you get on some program. It's government subsidised, so that should support you to access some things. And sometimes they'll do bus trips and other social activities. There's no excuse now for people to be isolated. Obviously through COVID we had to be, but if someone's home alone, and I will say there was one patient home alone, isolated, and I found him at home by himself, passed away, and it's extremely distressing for us nurses to come to that. And I guess the thing that drives me is I never ever want to see that again. All those people in our communities matter, and they all deserve to have death with dignity and support. I know there's some of you out there that are 40 listening to this, and I don't mean you guys, but as you do age, death becomes more of reality, and doing that with the most respectful and in a dignified way is something that's part of the nurse's role to facilitate as well.
Another important reason, so it's vital that we get more nurses out into community to look out for people living with Parkinson's. We're just about running out of time, but there was one question here I wanted to ask. Dorothy has asked whether there has been any research looking into a link between trauma and the onset of Parkinson's. Is that something, Heath? Is there something in that?
It's definitely something that has been looked at. So we know trauma to the brain can lead to things like dementias as well. There is an association of trauma to the brain and things like the development of dementia. I don't think there's any hard evidence to show that I'm aware of, at least, of early trauma to the brain and then development of Parkinson's per se. But we do know that, you know, changes, stress to the brain, anything that adds an insult to the brain, you know, can lead to things that, you know, are not optimal in terms of the brain function, of course. And stress in particular, the release of a lot of neurotoxic type compounds when there's a stress to the brain can cause death to certain, you know, nerve cells, and therefore, you know, it fits well with the type of research that we're doing, that the loss of those types of nerve cells can then cause what we see, you know, dementias or Parkinson's disease. So whilst I'm not aware of any definitive link that has shown trauma to the brain as a cause of Parkinson's, I definitely can see that there is a rationale why that could be the case. Claire might know a little bit more than me actually on that.
Claire, there was a question actually earlier, Claire, around the type of research that you are doing. I know that wasn't the focus for you being on today, but did you want to just give us a summary of what you've been researching and what you found?
Yeah, sure. So as Joanne mentioned before about the brain banks, so I actually have had a lot to do with the brain banks throughout my research career. So part of my PhD and the work that I still do is really looking actually at this post-mortem brain tissue that we get donated by these wonderfully generous people with Parkinson's, and of course people who don't have Parkinson's, so that we have something to compare it to. And so one of the things that I was doing in my PhD was actually looking at the involvement of the immune system in Parkinson's patients. So something that we sort of know is important, but not a lot has actually really been done on it. So one of the things that I was interested in is looking at the infiltration of particular types of immune cells that are normally found in the periphery of the body, but actually looking at how they come into the brain in conditions like Parkinson's. And we were sort of mirroring this up with a study looking at the blood of Parkinson's patients. So kind of more along the lines of what Heath mentioned before in terms of biomarkers. So we were specifically looking for changes in populations of cells that we could detect with something as easy as a blood test. And we did find that there were some specific changes in cell types in our Parkinson's patients compared to control patients, so people who didn't have Parkinson's but were matched for the same age and the same gender. And that was a really interesting finding that we're still following up in bigger cohorts, so bigger numbers of people, so that we can look to see whether that could potentially be a biomarker and a diagnostic tool as interventions. We do more research and potentially can find interventions that can happen earlier.
Thank you so much, Claire. So I think we're going to have to leave it there. An hour is clearly just not long enough. I apologise for those people whose questions we haven't been able to get to. I will share them with the panellists and we'll get answers out to you as soon as we can. One thing I've learned from this is that no two Parkinson's journeys are the same. There's a huge number of variables, the progression of the disease, the symptoms that you have. But of course, I have also learned that, you know, if there is something that you're not quite sure about, go to your GP and contact Parkinson's New South Wales, seek out that support that you might need. You might not even know what support it is that you might need, but Parkinson's New South Wales will be able to point you in the right direction, or of course your GP. And if you're not happy with your GP, the message that I got was, you know, maybe look around, see if there's somebody else that you might like to go to that can really, you know, support you in the way that you need and that's right for you and your family. I just want to wish everybody on this webinar all the best with their Parkinson's journey, and of course their families, caring for them. I'm sure you're doing a wonderful, wonderful job. Claire, will you please thank Graham and your family for generously sharing that story with us all today. And of course, thank you to our panelists. We couldn't be able to put these webinars on without your support. So we're just so grateful for you taking the time out to answer everyone's questions and to share your knowledge and your expertise on this subject. Check out our website, IHMRI, IHMRI.org.au for more information on the research that happens here at IHMRI. We also have a newsletter. I know through the registration process, many of you have signed up to that already. If you haven't, I do urge you to go and have a look at our monthly newsletter. You can subscribe to that on our website. We have lots of events coming up, including a face-to-face event. We're looking to invite members of the community into IHMRI, hopefully around June, end of June, for an open day to meet some of our researchers and find out about some of the incredible work that's happening right here in the Illawarra Shoalhaven region. And there is a short survey, a very short survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar. I would really appreciate it if you have the chance to fill that in before you leave us today. We want to continue with these webinars and we want to continue putting out content that you want to hear. So if you do have 5 minutes, if you wouldn't mind filling in that survey, that would be very much appreciated. So thank you again to everybody involved, panelists, the audience. We really appreciate you joining us today, and hopefully we will see you at the next webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.